which I absolutely love. Janet and I went to see it with our neighbors, and all four of us just came away going, wow. And and then I've got a whole bunch of little news items. Then I've got a really interesting story from Texas. And then I want to talk about, and this is really important, what you're thinking when you die, what that does to you or for you or against you. So, you know, nobody else is going to mention these topics. And, you know, some of them might scare you. You have to be an adult. So, you know, but these are things that ought to be said. And I'm glad I'm the one saying them because nobody else is saying them. So good evening to my highly esteemed producer, Swami Shiva. How are you, sir?
Namaste and blessings. This Swami welcomes everyone, whether live in the archives or eventually on YouTube, with great love and great respect from the heart of all.
Well, I have to commend you once again. You were doing such a great job posting my shows to my YouTube channel, the Gordon James Gianninoto YouTube channel, which I'm smiling as I say that because I had it for 10 years. I had nothing on there until Swami came along and waved his magic wand. But you're doing a great job. And I decided that I really ought to start at the beginning of the shows and say what I'm going to talk about because it drives me nuts when I go, oh, where was that show I talked about reincarnation and extraterrestrials? And I'm listening show after show, and I still can't find it. So I think I'm making it easier for myself to put an index or a table of contents at the beginning just to help. And that doesn't mean I'm going to follow one thing I say I'm going to do. You know what happens when you start talking.
Best laid plans of mice and men, yes.
Yeah, anything can happen. So, but we always have to start, and I'm glad to do this, that this is listener-supported radio. And if this means anything to you, would you please give some money? You go to Freedom's Lips or freedomslips.com, and you go about a third of the way down the page, and on the right-hand side, you can click to donate with PayPal, Visa or MasterCard, debit or credit cards. You can scroll all the way to the bottom and get a mailing address where you can send a donation. And that's very important because the only way this stays on the air is with donations. And if you give $50, you get 900 survival documents on a thumb drive. And if you give $100, you get a beautiful prize. You not only get the 900 survival documents on a DVD, but you also get 35,000 non-GMO seeds in a freezer pack. And I know some of you are still sitting on your couch in the city, and you're thinking, well, I don't know if I'll ever need that. Meanwhile, today I prepared a big bed of asparagus. So I mixed screened topsoil with wood chips and spread it out in a nice deep bed, and we've got 32 asparagus plants to put in there. And I also have, because of a dear friend, a bag of asparagus seeds. I can't even tell you how many hundreds or thousands of asparagus seeds, which I'm going to scatter about after I plant the adult plants. I'm going to scatter that around. So, you know, that's why you need the 35,000 non-GMO seeds. They breed true. You can save some of the seed from this year's crop and plant them next year, and then you're going to have something to eat. So, you know, just to give you an example of what's going on that they're not really explaining, the U.S. government has a laboratory that can tell you which bilge on which ship a drop of oil came from. And they can also tell you which pipeline and which oil well a drop of oil can come from. And that's because the oil pipelines and the oil wells have to submit samples. But you didn't know that. And every drop of oil has its own signature characteristic. Well, guess what? Tarballs have been washing up on the beach in Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, Torrance, and now Long Beach. And tarballs are really obnoxious because they're just light enough to not hit the bottom hard and stay there, and they're just heavy enough to not float on the surface, so you really don't see them. And the Pacific is quite cold, so they just roll around against each other, and when they do hit the bottom, they pick up some sand. So they do get a little bit heavier. And meanwhile, the volatile elements evaporate off. And you've got these golf ball size tar balls. And they're about as hard as a golf ball. If you reach into the cold Pacific waters at your feet when you feel them bumping against your calf, and grab one and pick it up, you'll see it's a tar ball, like a golf ball. And the thing is in the cold Pacific water, they bang in each other and create these little tar flakes. So you go into the water, you think, a beautiful day to take a swim in the Pacific. And this has been going on in Los Angeles at Santa Monica for years. I mean, everybody knows this. And you go in the water and you stand up and there are these little flakes of tar. Well, you're thinking, well, they're just floating around the water. I'll rinse them off. No, you won't, because the sun hits your skin and glues them to you. So now you look down and they're glued to your bathing suit. They're glued all over your whole body, even into your bathing suit, on your face, in your hair. And then you think, oh, well, luckily the state of California has put showers at the top of the beach. So as I leave the beach, I'll just shower it off. Well, no, you won't. So the very first time that ever happened, I went back to my apartment and I'm driving up and down the street thinking, who is going to have gasoline and a rag? And that's what I had to do, is get gasoline and a rag to wipe it off. So it's really obnoxious. And yes, in long term, it means that you really can't go swimming in those beaches anymore unless you have a way to clean tar off your body. But the question is, they've been having these tar balls now, and geez, they just can't seem to identify them. Now, why would that be, and what does it mean? What it means is, well, let's start, why would that be? Southern California is one giant tar seep. In the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, you've probably seen those, Swami?
Yes, yes I have.
Dinosaurs fell in, all kinds of animals, mountain lions, dinosaurs. They just would get trapped in the tar. It's so sticky, and then pretty soon they just get pulled in and suffocated and preserved forever. So they started digging in the La Brea tar pits, which are right in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. Well, there were so many tar seeps all over the Southern California that's why you go drive around and you see oil wells in everybody's backyard, is because there was a tar seep in their yard, and they figured, well, there's got to be oil there, and they drilled down, and sure enough, there was. And some of them are only like producing a barrel a week or a barrel a month. But you know, at the price, if the price of fuel is petroleum is $100 a barrel, that ain't bad, you know, because you're not really doing that much for it. And then you look offshore, and the whole horizon is all oil wells. So all these oil wells are creating a suction. And so you would think that would be like a negative pressure on the tar and keep it down there. But guess what? We're about to have the northern end of South America move west, and that's pushing Mexico west slightly and creating a bow-shaped squeeze, with the center of the bow being San Diego. So what's happening is the pressure from South America trying to crush Central America and move west is squeezing the tar out of all the tar seeps. That's why they can't pin this on somebody. And that's why they keep coming up. Now, what I'm saying to you, let me put this in plain English. The tar balls are a sign of the impending apocalypse. That's it. Simple. And they're not going to get better until the big quake. And the big quake is going to be when South America starts moving west. That's going to relieve the pressure. The bow will not have that anymore. And what it's doing to the east of LA is creating fissures and cracks, which is why you have the plume of methane at the Four Corners, the plume of methane in the Salton Sea, 400 earthquakes a week in Oklahoma, and the New Madrid Fault about to go off. So, you know, this is all important data for you to absorb. Now, I have a dear nephew. I love him dearly. And he's got a wonderful girlfriend. And they were looking for a house in Woodstock, New York. And I said, make sure it's more than 700 feet above sea level, and you're going to survive the tidal surge and the increase in the sea level from the oceans. So they bought a house. Where do you think they bought it? Next to the Hudson River. Next to the Hudson River.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They look out the window, and there's the Hudson River in Kingston, New York. Well, that's better than living in Brooklyn, I guess, because where are you going to run in Brooklyn? At least if you're in Kingston and you have some warning, you can get in a car and head, you know, half an hour to the Catskills. So I guess that's better. But you know, and then I was talking to her, and she's like, well, you only live one life, and we have no control over anything, and I don't believe a word you're saying. And I'm like thinking to myself, wow, she's built a nice little box, and now she's going to inhabit it. And that's what I find most people are doing. And I think the Council of Worlds created a lull, a 2-year lull, where people could get it together. There could be massive social change. The world could wake up and grow, and people could recognize that they're each part of the creator and get along. And did that happen? No. So I think the Council of Worlds said, okay, full speed ahead. 10 plagues of Egypt multiplied times every place in the world, no problem. Earthquakes, no problem. Undersea volcanoes off of Oregon with two 5.9, which were probably really 7.5 quakes next to the volcano. That doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. So now I have some other news. It's this is just stuff to drive you nuts, absolutely nuts.
Really? Is the name Kardashian going to be in it?
No.
Okay.
I do have some control. God, that is one story, boy. Okay. So you know that VW, you've probably seen the TV ad. They have I think it's the Volkswagen Jetta diesel powered. I think it gets 45 miles a gallon. Has anybody ever driven one or seen one or seen the ad for it?
Not me.
Well, my friend was telling me, guess what their European model, the same car, slightly tweaked differently. Guess what it's getting miles per gallon in Germany?
54.
Yeah, 110 miles per gallon.
Wow.
Is that sold in the United States? No. But guess what? Volkswagen just came out with a Jetta, diesel-powered Jetta that gets, now you have to guess this number, okay? Let's just say it's several factors over the American model. Not just double. Let's go beyond double. Okay, here you go. And they're only making 25 of them. Now, what does that tell you? Bro, what do you think the mile per gallon is on this?
166.
Okay, well, you're going in the right direction. Now, it goes 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, which, hey, that's respectable, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't need to do it in 4 seconds, do you?
Not really.
Okay, it gets 289 miles per gallon of diesel.
Wow.
When's the last time you saw something like that for sale in the United States?
Never even heard of such a thing like that in existence anywhere.
Exactly. So now, the first 3 days of June set a new all-time cold record in New England. Boston never broke, for the daily high temperature, never broke 49 degrees for 3 days in a row. And we were 45, and I didn't hear that was a record. But like today, we were a lovely 51. So it's like the polar vortex is continuing. But that's a lot better living in Maine than living in Denver, where today they had softball-sized hail. Might as well keep your car in the underground concrete bunker.
I had seen a headline, where was it? On AccuWeather about tornadoes touching down in Colorado. And you don't hear about tornadoes in Colorado.
Right. Well, they're just slightly off of tornado. Yeah, they had tornadoes today. They had tornadoes yesterday. Spectacular things. So as I'm saying, and you can choose to listen and not believe a word I'm saying, although why would you? I mean, I hope I've convinced somebody at some point. But we really are at the end times, and every time there's pole shift, you get what I call the 10 plagues of Egypt. First, the hail stripped all the fruit off the trees. Then it stripped the leaves off the trees. Then the Nile River turned red with the iron oxide and hydrocarbons, and all the crops died. The wheat was stripped off the stalks. And pretty soon nobody had anything to eat or drink. That's pretty serious. And I keep telling you, go out in your yard and look around, and then one day next week, don't go to a store or eat anything from a store. Just eat out of your yard for a day, and that will show you what you are dealing with. Now, let's move on to the Sunnis in Iraq. And a whole bunch of them just swore allegiance to ISIS. And they're like, this is such a lost cause. I mean, what are we going to do about this? Now we've sent the shoulder-fired rockets, but there's no Iraqi troops to fire them. The allied troops fighting ISIS changed sides. Well, think about it. It makes sense. If you fight ISIS and they take over your town, they're going to hunt you down and behead you. They're going to punish you. They take revenge. But if you fight against the Iraq army with Western help, then and you get caught, you're definitely not going to be beheaded. So, I mean, if I were a Sunni warlord with my own little private army, I think I'd swear allegiance to ISIS as well. I mean, it's a safety measure. Doesn't it make sense? I think it does.
100%.
I mean, who can blame them? But I don't know what the answer is to that. Now, I saw Rick Perry. It was sort of, he worked on his speech for 2 years. Christ, if he couldn't get that right, something was wrong. He announced for president. And I've got to say that most of the people that are running for president scare the hell out of me. And I don't know what to make of Rick Perry. He resigned as governor so he could spend 2 years getting ready to run for president this time without screwing up over which agencies he was going to abolish last time he ran. And that was very embarrassing, so he wants to avoid that stuff. But he did say something that I really liked, which is that he was in the graveyards at Normandy, where all the graves face west towards the United States. And he was looking at all these graves, and 15 of them in a row were fathers and sons and brothers. And they were members of the same family that had fought in World War II. And he said, these people who died in service to the United States traded their future for yours. Wow, I thought those were powerful words. And he said, I hope we're worthy of it. So I'm not so convinced that I would even think of voting for Rick Perry. But then again, they had this other guy on there, Ted Cruz. He was saying, every candidate, I guess there's 10 Republican candidates now, they each need $50 million at a minimum to even consider the possibility of winning an election. So look at how much money is being spent. And that's just in the primaries. So, I just thought those were powerful words from Rick Perry. I'm not suggesting that you vote for him or that I'm voting for him. I haven't made up my mind. But I will say that Hillary Clinton scares the bejesus out of me. Now, I'm really liking this guy. He's the Democrat, Mark O'Malley. He was, I guess, the mayor of Baltimore, and then maybe he was governor. I forgot. But anyway, he seems like he has his head screwed on right. So if you have to vote Democratic, I'm advocating that you vote for him. And as to Republican, I don't know they'll ever get it together. They're doing each other in, so what could be possibly left for the election? But anyway, now, Windows 10.1. Swami said he read this on the Ning, and yes, it's true. You can go look this up on poleshift.ning.com. Microsoft is skipping 9. Why go halfway over controlling your life when you can go all the way with Windows 10? So when you sign the agreement to initialize it, and by the way, it's free, what does that tell you? You're agreeing that they will update any time that they wish. Now, I just had the fun of going to my computer at 10 minutes after 11 and discovering I once again had the blue bar of death. And I tell people, I have no choice. They upgraded me from 8 to 8.1 against my will. Specific instructions do not update, and they did. And then they just decide to update every Friday night before my show. Coincidence, right? So I just got control of it at 11:30, which is half an hour before the show. But Windows 10, what Microsoft has been trying to do, and the government's been trying to do, is eliminate the communication part of the internet. In other words, they would love to see it so you just go on the internet to purchase some shoes or to read a major media source like the New York Times, but not to send an email to somebody. Well, that doesn't go over very well. People absolutely love blogging and communicating. So now what they've done, and this is my understanding of it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Swami, but they're going to look for keywords in what people are saying to each other, and they're going to try and figure out what's going viral. And before it goes viral, they are going to come up with an official explanation that turns it into, well, basically the government lie to cover up what people are saying. Is that what you got out of that?
I think that is perhaps the most sensible utilization of real-time monitoring.
Yeah, so
from their point of view.
Now, I think what they're trying to do is they'd love to stop all of us from commenting on anything. But that's not really going to work. Now, I have a dear friend who I had mentioned occasionally when Robert Pepino had this show, but his name is Abdul. That's all I'm going to say for his name. But anyway, he is one of the world's, if not the world's greatest computer genius. And I've been friends with him since 2008. And you know the AMD chip company and Intel chips. Well, AMD is far in advance of Intel. And you've heard of IBM's computer Big Blue. You know, they're always working on, can beat anybody at chess and stuff like that. And then you've heard of Cray supercomputers, right?
Yep.
Well, guess where the people who write the software for those computers go to get ideas over what the next step is?
Bet it ain't Baskin Robbins.
That's right. It's my friend Abdul. And he came up with the cloud before anybody else. The Rothschilds offered him hundreds of millions of dollars for everything he had written for code for that. And he realized, geez, this is going to fall into the wrong people's hands and they're going to be controlling everybody. So I'm going to turn it down. So then he figured out, and this is a brilliant idea, so simple but yet so brilliant, that computers spend most of their time executing instructions one at a time. It's sort of a patriarchal system. The male thinks linearly. So you execute step one, then you go to step two and you execute step two. Then when you finish that, you go to step three, etc. So he's sitting and thinking, you know, why don't we design the software so that it's feminine? It multitasks like every single woman has to do. And instead of just executing steps linearly one at a time, if you're not doing anything, even if it's only 2 millionths of a second, why not work on improving yourself? And so he did. I'll give you an example. First of all, did you know that all the airlines and Visa and MasterCard are using 35-year-old computer programs to run them?
No.
Yeah. And not only that, they're using servers with tape machines. It's like almost key punch.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. He did a test just to see how his system worked. Now, what he did was he figured what you don't need is more computer power. What you need is to allocate the resources better. So he figured out a way to link all these small, modest laptops and personal computers into one giant computing machine that at any point in time, one part of it can be on and the other part of it can be off, and yet it's still working on what it wants to work on. And British Telecom has 60 million telephones. Now, most people don't know that if you have a landline, you get pinged once a month. I don't know if you have a landline, Swami, do you?
Yep.
You ever been sitting there and you hear like part of a ring, but it's not a full ring?
Yes.
Yeah, you ever wonder what that was, or did you know what it was?
Did not know.
Well, that's every phone company with a landline pings you once a month to see, A, if the phone is connected. And that's it. And if it rings.
Right.
So all they need is part of a ring. So you're just sitting there and you're thinking, wow, somebody called me, but they hung up before it even went through, or something like that. Oh. So British Telecom has 60 million phones, and it was taking their computers the whole month, 30 days, to ping all 60 million phones. And he loaded his software onto a whole bunch of smaller British Telecom laptops and desktops. And he pinged all British Telecom phones in 3 days.
Wow. So
instead of 30 days, it was 3 days. In other words, 1/10 the time. So that's how efficient this guy's software is. So when the people who write the software for Cray supercomputers need a new idea, who do they seek out? They go find my friend Abdul, and they ask him what's next. Where do you think the top people at IBM go to figure out how to make Big Blue even more powerful? They go to Abdul. Where do you think the chip makers at AMD go to find out what they could possibly do to improve things? Abdul. So I would love to have him on as a guest. Anyway, he has turned down more money than some of the richest people in the world will ever earn in their lives, for the software ideas he's come up with and finished. I mean, they're ready to go. Turn them down so that because he's afraid, like they just came out with, robots will be able to repair themselves. Well, using his software, that could have happened 10 years ago. But he is worried that the rich and the powerful and the elite are trying to get control of everybody's computers and control their lives. And he thought about what could he do that would really make a big difference. And he thought, what can I do to help create an internet after pole shift? And so that's what he's been working on for at least 5 years. You can just imagine where he's gotten with that, and I have no idea. But I don't know if he's planning on using shortwave radios and transmitting emails over that, or whether he's assuming that there will be some sort of local wireless, or, because all the international cables are going to be out. So I don't know, what he could do with that. So I thought people would find that interesting, that just wait for Windows 10.1. Once, I have a couple of XP computers. I've got a couple of Vista computers. My computer is getting so hot I can cook dinner on the keyboard. So I might have to get another one. And I'm not going to wait till it burns out and I've lost everything. So, I've got all along XP, Vista, 7, 8, and now this damn 8.1. So they're skipping 9. They're going right to 10.1. And 10.1 is basically, it's just like those programs that listen to your phone calls. And if you say something like president and assassinate in the same sentence, then it gets kicked out for a live person to listen to what you said. So in this case, they're going to be looking for keywords before things go viral, because it's sort of a riot, isn't it, Swami? That's their big fear. Like if you're the government and you're thinking of what keeps you awake at night, it's not ghouls and poltergeists, vampires and zombies. It's things going viral.
Yeah.
Like when NASA said that we're going to have some auras are going to be because of the big solar flare. And even space.com, which is usually NASA's little lapdog, said, what solar flare? There was a solar flare 4 days ago, which barely moved the needle on the scale. And now you're saying that's going to cause. And of course, what it was is they sent up those magnetic flux reconnection satellites, which is bullshit. Oh, excuse my language. I'm sorry for that. Because there is no such thing.
Edit that out in post-production.
Yeah, well, thank God for something. So, they're measuring the magnetic storms from the tail of Planet X. And when they saw that there was going to be a big magnetic storm that was going to cause the aurora to be seen, then they announced, of course, they're not going to say, oh, the tail of Planet X is causing an aurora. They're going to say it was the solar flare. But even space.com made fun of them for doing that. And that was the first time I've ever seen that. So, you can just imagine what keeps them up late at night worrying about stuff. Now, a lot of people have mentioned to me, we're all doomed anyway because every nuclear reactor is going to fail. And honestly, I have to say that's probably true. It was interesting to me that I saw on Al Jazeera News, which I've got to say, I was biased at first. Why do I want to watch some Muslim news channel? This is ridiculous. Why are they bringing it to America? Am I going to be propagandized? But I got to say, it outdoes everybody, all the networks, all the cable news, everybody. And that's because they have live reporters on the scene showing you this stuff. They aren't just sitting at a desk talking about it. They actually go out there. And they're very pro-American. I mean, all the news is slanted for our audience. So they had a special on people who have moved back into the Chernobyl disaster area in the Ukraine. If you remember when Chernobyl went off in 1986, the worst nuclear disaster ever. And they've been hiring nuclear engineers. I'm not sure. I don't think that any part of it still operates, but there may be a part of that, one or two reactors that are still going. I have no idea because they actually sent a reporter with a white suit and a Geiger counter into the control room where these nuclear engineer and chemical engineers are reporting for work every day. And it's the same control room from 1978. Now, don't you love this? The same computer equipment, the same keyboards, the same screens from 1978, and it all still works. Nothing has failed. And they're there every day. I don't know what the hell they're doing. That wasn't really clear, but I wasn't glued to the TV set. I was doing other things. But then they showed there are people that said, well, we're elderly. We love the area. We've always lived here. Just because they told us to leave forever doesn't mean that we're going to do what they say. So they moved back into their towns, and they're living there and growing vegetables and fishing and doing all kinds of stuff, and they seem to be fine. So the point of that report was just because the government tells you that everything's going to be permanently radioactive doesn't mean that they're telling the truth. Now, I don't know if that's because ETs have gone in there and changed the half-life and made it safe for those people or what. But I can tell you this, and this is my opinion. Nobody else has told me this. If the ETs don't come and change the half-life of all these failed nuclear reactors, we are doomed. That's my opinion. We're doomed. Because every single waterway in the world has nuclear reactors sucking cooling water out of the waterway and putting hot water back into the waterway. And all those places where land meets the sea or the rivers or the lakes, they're all fault lines. So what you're doing is you've basically positioned every nuclear reactor around the world on a fault line. Now, if all the fault lines are going to have quakes, then it doesn't look good for us. So if somebody says we're all doomed, I mean, how can you disagree with that except for that that there are benevolent extraterrestrials, and if their goal is to graduate a whole bunch of people to the next dimension up, the next frequency, about within 100 years after pole shift, if there's not going to be anybody left, then what are we really talking about here? So either the reactors are going to fail, radiation is going to be everywhere, and we're all going to die, or they're going to step in and somehow clean it up magically, and you won't really know why you aren't dead yet, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of how it would have to go because, worldwide press is not going to exist, basically.
Exactly. They're going to be out to lunch permanently. They're going to be gone. And anyway, after all this stuff comes out about Planet X and people realize what's happening, and then they're going to think back, well, did the New York Times tell me about that? How about the Washington Post? How about the Chicago Tribune? How about the LA Times? Did they tell me? Did Spiegel in Germany? Did the London Times? Did the UK Daily Mail tell me about this? No, they didn't. So, I think at that point, you're not going to believe anybody that ever told you what was going on before. Why would you ever believe them again? You know, the hypocrisy, the lies. It's just ridiculous. Um, so now I have a pleasant little story to tell you, which is that a female crow has adopted Janet.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and she's always been up here. She's a native. There's a whole family of crows, and if you don't know much about crows, other than being a jerk and shooting at them every chance you get, if you have ever studied them at all, they're very intelligent and they're very loyal, and they have families, and they stay with their family. And when you see a big flock, all the crows in that flock are all related. And Janet had we fed the crows when we used to live in the fishing village, and she had a talk with them one day that she was going to be moving and she was sorry and she wouldn't be there to feed them anymore. And that night she had a dream that they all landed in a circle to say goodbye to her. And the next day she was packing up the car with the very last stuff, and we were leaving and never going back to that house. And all of a sudden, about 10 crows landed in a circle all around her to say goodbye to her, just like her dream.
Wow.
So, you know,
that's an interesting thing, because those who, well, at least within the yogic traditions, we learn to utilize crows for different functions and to relay messages and things like that. Back when, you know, before there was all this worldwide press, and that there was what some of us in the yogi traditions refer to as the internet. and folks could communicate with each other, and it was just more subtle. And but that will certainly exist, you know, beyond the change. But crows were a big part of they were a specific species utilized by a lot of yogis in order to spread messages or get a peek at something in a faraway place.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Now, I have always known this, but I don't know how I knew it. Mm-hmm. But crows are the most easily taken over by another being,
right?
And they allow themselves to be. And so, just what you said, to take a peek at something, you can actually, if you have a relationship with a crow, you can have it go look at what you want to see, mm-hmm. and it will look at it, and you'll be in the crow looking out through its eyes, and you'll see what you wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting because I had moved to Maine in 1985. My dad died in '88, and he was in a wheelchair on oxygen, and he never got to come to Maine and see why I liked it, and he never got to see the house that I had. And the first time that I came back to Maine after he died, because I rushed down to Connecticut, of course, and then I came back after, we had the funeral or whatever. So the very first time I came back to Maine, I was standing in the second story of my house looking out, and I could see across the field about half a mile, and I saw a crow. It was like the crow took a start when he looked at me, and he cocked his head so one eye was looking at me, and he flew the whole half mile right over to the window where I was, and the eye of this crow, he like fluttered, so he was slowly hovering in front of the window about a couple of inches from the glass, and I was on the other side of the glass, and I knew it was my father taking a last look at me.
Ah, right.
So we've been up here now for 15 years, and the crows all know Janet very well because, and believe me, they love turkey bones, roast turkey bones. They just think that's the greatest thing. Pick over the carcass after we're done with it. And anything that goes slightly bad and we're not going to eat it, we put it out for the crows. And Janet, like if she makes bacon, she'll save the bacon fat and pour it into cracked corn in a bowl and let it cool and then put it out for the crows. Well, don't they love that?
Mm.
So they will actually fly around and sit on trees and look in the windows. But recently, just in the last 2 weeks, this one crow, which I have to believe is a female, but I'm not sure, has taken, and she always, like when Janet would leave in her car, she would always fly halfway down the mountain and wait on a tree on the road until Janet came back and then fly above Janet's car in front of it all the way back home. So starting 2 weeks ago, she started, when Janet's outside, she will land behind Janet and walk behind her. Wherever Janet walks, she'll walk on the ground right behind Janet and talk to her. And she will fly over Janet and say crow-like things. So, we were thinking over, who is this? Is this like a spirit guide doing this? Is the crow just naturally friendly, which of course that could be. And Janet and I both do talking to the animals, animal whispering. And we love getting more practice in and getting better at that. And but then I thought, I wonder if this is one of Janet's ET friends. So I don't really know, but I think it's a really interesting story that now whenever Janet goes outside, she's got a crow flying just over her head, and then once Janet starts walking in some direction, will land right behind her and footstep for footstep walk behind Janet. So I think that's a heartwarming story. You can like it or not like it. I don't know. Okay, now there was a quake in Malaysia today, and it was 5.9, but that means it's really like 7.5. And it was in the snow-covered mountains of Malaysia. Well, who knew? I thought Malaysia was below the equator. Am I wrong in that?
Wow, I thought it was too.
Yeah, well, I didn't know they had snow-covered mountains. So this remote area had a 7.5 quake. The government's, the U.S. government saying it's 5.9. I'm saying, based on the damage that they showed on Al Jazeera, that it had to be like a 7.5. There's this 4-lane superhighway sunken down 100 feet every couple of 100 feet, off at an angle, cracked, parted in the middle with both sides spread to either side. Huge, but it only killed 12 people. But some of those people were, wouldn't you know it, mountain climbing on the icy mountains. And when the quake struck, the mountain just flung them into the air, and they fell thousands of feet to their death. So, yes, the whole Pacific Rim is extremely active now. So I thought you'd enjoy that little story. Yep. Okay. Now, would you like to hear the review of San Andreas?
I would, because this Swami has been trying to talk Shaktima into going and seeing this at a theater that has what's called D-box seating, which is where the seat actually moves.
Oh, my God.
And I think that would be interesting to have that sensation in an earthquake movie. It's rather expensive, but it would be a curious experience.
I can imagine. I wouldn't pay for 3D because to me it's just so annoying to sit there with these paper goggles on. And
well,
it gives
3D
me
and the D-box.
Oh my God.
So it's an immersion type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, well then you might as well fly to a city with IMAX.
Yeah, I've done the IMAX thing once, and that
I've never seen one, but I'm imagining that's pretty good.
It's huge.
Yeah. So this movie, let me just say this, and a note to Solaris, who criticized me that I'm not a film critic when I criticized one of her videos, and then she's refused to ever talk to me again. Yes, this is another one of my film reviews, Solaris, that you never thought I ever gave, but actually most of them are written down and recorded on UFO Digest. So, like, you might want to read my review of The Man from Planet X. That was a classic. Anyway, this movie is, let me repeat this several times, not to be missed, not to be missed, not to be missed. It is so well filmed, and the color graphic is just spectacular. And look, you're going to see the disaster of the San Andreas Fault going off. That's what you're going for. The plot is really secondary. If you like Dwayne Johnson, you're going to like that part of it. He's married and got a daughter, and then they're getting a divorce, and the wife has got a new boyfriend. So there's this subplot, and it sometimes strays into B-movie category plot. But what's interesting is that it is unbelievably spectacular. It starts off, first of all, with this girl driving down a narrow mountain road with her cell phone, and she's texting. and getting texts, reading them, and answering them. And there's tractor trailers coming, and on one side there's a 1,000-foot drop, and the other side it's a cliff. And you're sure any moment she's going to hit the tractor trailer, or she's going to hit one of the cars, or she's going to go off the road. And instead, all out of the blue, a huge earthquake hits, and the whole mountain above the side of the road becomes one giant rock slide and pushes the car right off the road into this ravine, where it gets hung up about 1,000 feet from the bottom by the car doors. And in flies Dwayne Johnson with a helicopter into a crevice that is too narrow for the helicopter to remain horizontal. So he angles it so he can get down in the crevice and rescue this girl. And it just starts off with action. I mean, it's just done spectacular. Just spectacular. And you feel like you're in the car with this girl and you're going to drop 1,000 feet and die. Why she didn't die when 20 million tons of rocks hit her car, I don't know, but there's but anyway, so it's all action. He's a rescue pilot for, I guess, the LA County ambulance crew. And he's a rescue helicopter pilot. So the quake starts in LA, and it's spectacular. I mean, it's just awe-inspiring. And I spoke to Nancy Leader. She went to see it on Friday. I went to see it on Saturday with Janet. She loved it, and our two neighbors, and they loved it. And we went out to dinner and then saw the movie. It was a great evening, believe me. And Nancy and I agreed that it was scientifically and prophetically accurate. So there. Now, I've seen people say, oh, this movie's not accurate because there's no such thing as electromagnetic screaming. Well, yes, there is. And that's what Janet feels before a quake. She feels like her feet are on fire, and she's feeling the electron flow from the quartz under her feet being squeezed.
So it's like a piezoelectric.
Exactly, and she's walking around.
She's getting.
We had a quake right under our house. It was only a 2, but that was good enough to show us what goes on. And for 6 months before that, her feet kept burning more and more and more, and that was the pressure building. Then there was the jolt. And so the night before the quake, she's running around the house going, there's electricity in the floor. I'm turning everything off. And I said, Janet, you helped me build this house. There's no wiring in the floor. Nothing is connected to the floor. The floor is concrete. And she would turn stuff off, and I'd be right behind her turning it back on. And that went on for like 2 hours. She goes, Gordon, you're wrong. There's electricity in the floor. And so finally, and not only that, but we both were on the Kevin Smith show that night. That was July 6th, 2011. And that was her birthday. So she had so much coffee to be on the Kevin Smith show, because she usually goes to bed at 8 o'clock. So she was so caffeinated that, and I'm a natural night owl anyway. So at 5 in the morning, the sun came up, and we, as I said, Janet feeds the birds. And believe me, that's a quite sizable chunk of money every month, but it's a lot of fun. I got to admit it. And so anyway, she feeds the birds, and they always raise a racket. Like if she hasn't come out to feed them, they will land on the screen, hang on to the screen, and peck at the glass through the screen. Like, hey, did you forget about us? And they'll sit on the trees and call out. And she went outside, and it was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And she came back in, and she goes, something's really wrong. And so I went outside with her, and it was total silence as far as the ear could hear. And it was all you could hear was an occasional whimpering animal in the woods. You could hear different animals whimpering. Like they didn't know what to do, because they're feeling this piezoelectric, except they can't explain it to each other or look it up on Wikipedia or talk to other psychics. You know, they don't know what to do. So we came back in and we made a cup of coffee, and we're going, something is seriously wrong. And then all of a sudden it was like an F-16 took off from a mountain about 8 miles away, headed straight for our house. And it was like somebody had put every 3 feet from that mountain to our mountain a stick of dynamite. every 3 feet and set them off consecutively. And it approached and went right under us. And then 2 miles to the south, there's a crack with salt water, and it's called like a thoroughfare or a reach. And that's where ships go through, is a shortcut without going all the way around all the islands. They can go through there. And at that crack, the quake stopped. And immediately her feet, for the first time in 6 months, had no pain. And then the birds started singing again, and everything was back to normal. And so in the movie, Paul Giamatti has this laptop that you'd love to have that had a big red bar graph on it showing the screaming of the electromagnetic flux from the piezoelectric effect. And he's standing on the Hoover Dam, and he realizes, oh my God, it's going to go, because he's the seismologist. And he goes, everybody off the dam, it's going to go, it's going to go. And so right back into it, with that hot action, just, blood boiling, pulse pounding action. And of course, the Hoover Dam goes. So then he discovers his daughter is in San Francisco, and she's going to be in trouble. So Dwayne Johnson, you got to love him, he steals the helicopter that he's the rescue pilot for, and he picks up his wife, who's in danger of dying in a falling skyscraper in L.A. Again, stupendous scenes. I mean, if you can watch this movie and want to live in a city after that, considering what's about to happen, something is seriously wrong with you. It just shows you how inevitable the complete destruction is, and what would be left, and what would you make of it? You wouldn't make anything of it, because it's even the stuff that's slightly damaged is unusable. All the power's out, everything's off, fires are starting, debris is still falling from the aftershocks. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So he steals the helicopter. Then I forget what happens. He runs into some problems. So then he steals a plane. Then he steals somebody's truck. There's people looting stores, and they're filling a pickup truck, and they keep going back into the store. So while they're in the store, he steals their pickup truck. And then finally, in the last scene, which takes place in San Francisco, when the quake hits San Francisco. So as he travels north, he gets a little bit ahead, and then the quake happens, and you see that. Then he gets a little bit further north, and he gets there before the quake, and then the quake hits again. And so it's just spectacular. And it ends in San Francisco, and there's a tsunami, and it comes in. Well, I saw this woman go, the movie is not accurate, because they say in the movie that the quake's going to be felt on the East Coast. Well, yeah, the quake this summer is not going to be felt on the East Coast, but believe me, the quake at pole shift, it is going to be felt on the East Coast. And then she goes, and there would never be a tsunami that high, which I guess was about 100 feet. It's really hard to tell. It might have been 200 feet. Because there's never going to be a tsunami like that if there's that quake. But obviously she hasn't read Zeta Talk, because if she had, she would have known the oceans are going to send a tidal surge in at 600 feet. So anyway, it's a spectacular movie. You'll be interested, let's say, glued to it right up to the end. And it ends as suddenly as it began, and every moment of it is a thrill, except for a few hokey things. But Dwayne Johnson's daughter is helping these other people, because she's the smarty pants. She knows what radio to use that you can still contact people, what survival kit to use, how to bandage wounds, how to help people. It's like, if everyone watching the movie were as qualified as she is to survive, then we'd all survive. So it's a spectacular movie, and there's definitely some heartwarming moments, and there are other moments that if you never mentioned again, you wouldn't miss it. But you're not going for the plot. You're definitely going for the disaster, and that's what it is, and it gets an A+ for that. So is that a good enough review for you, Swami?
Outstanding and well timed. We've got we're going to be going into the top of the hour break here in about 60 seconds. So if you want to set up the next hour, this would be a good time for that.
Yeah. As I said, I want to discuss some really interesting stuff. And one of the things is something I just learned about this morning on the History Channel. You know, I like to watch my History Channel TV, the paranormal, not paranormal, but, unexplored mysteries, let's say, unexplained mysteries. Today on America Unearthed, they have rock. Well, we're back, and this is part 2, the second hour of Friday, June 5th show, which here in Maine is actually Saturday the 6th. But I have a few small news items, and then I want to get to the rock wall in Texas. Oh, my God. The Zetas are sort of stiff about things. The Zetas can only discuss pole shift, the dimensional change, and unselfish extraterrestrials and the new race. But, I'm interested in so many things, and this rock wall comes under under that category. Like, what in the hell is going on out there? Anyway, a little bit of news. As I mentioned last week, which I hope you heard that, but if you didn't, Janet and I have been selected to be guests on the Josh Tolley show, I guess Tolley or Tolley, Tolley, on Genesis Communications on Friday, June 19th at 10 in the morning Eastern time until noon. I guess they do a few intro things, and then they put us on at 10:15. He has been a moderator in presidential debates on CNN with Larry King, and he's in the top 100 business consultants in the world. He's friends with this guy, this motivational speaker, Tony Robbins, who I'm sure you all have seen on one commercial or another. He's very impressive, by the way. And they contacted us, and I said, who the hell is he? So we looked at who he was, and we're like, did you make a mistake? I mean, why do you want to have Janet and I? Do you know what we talk about? And they said, oh, yeah, we've listened to all your coast-to-coast interviews. We've heard other interviews, and we're so excited. And it turns out that when they ask their audience what they want most to learn about, it's UFOs, extraterrestrials, in the future. So I spoke to the producer for an hour and a half. She goes, you are going to love Josh. Josh is going to love you. You're going to have the greatest time. It's free-range radio. We can go anywhere with that. And I said, well, usually I mention so many things that you can't really cover them in even 2 hours. And people have me back 10 or 20 times more, which is true. And so she said that's possible too. So we'll see. But anyway, that's a big step up because it's carried live broadcast radio in 160 countries. And 7 million people listen to it. That's what they calculate. Just like everybody who's involved with radio says, it's very hard to know how many listeners you have. It's a good guess or it isn't a good guess. But it's also carried streaming on Genesis Communication. Now, it's not broadcast in Maine. There's no station in Maine. But I'm going to try, and before the 19th, I'm going to give everybody the link where they can go. But I'm just telling you, if you're smart, you can look it up yourself. It's Genesis Communication. It's streaming at 10 a.m. on Friday the 19th. And Janet and I will be on there together because it's during the day, and she will be awake. So now another piece of news is a woman from Sweden wrote Nancy and said, what's with Stockholm 2? Well, they're making plans to have 600,000 immigrants live in Sweden, southern Sweden, near Stockholm. So she wanted to know, what is that? So Nancy asked the Zetas, and that is the equivalent of the Chinese ghost cities, where people said, look, the failure of the communist system. The Chinese have built cities to hold 70 million people in the interior of China where nobody wants to live, and the cities are empty. They're ghost cities. So what is Sweden doing? Well, no, they're not getting ready for 600,000 people to come over from England or from Poland or Denmark. No. What they're doing is Stockholm is at sea level, and it's the capital. So they have a plan to seize all the vacation homes up in the hills above Stockholm, above 700 feet elevation. And the churches and the schools and the apartment buildings, enough to move the entire population of the city of Stockholm up into the hills before pole shift. Now, does that ring any bells with what the United States government has said they're going to do for us, the American citizens? Oh, gee, that's right. They're not going to do anything. There is no plan except to have National Guard stationed, and not National Guards, Special Forces troops stationed at the bridges and the crossings. So you don't see any similarity between what China and Sweden are doing for their population and what the United States is doing, do you, Swami?
No.
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 Shame on you, U.S. government. When are you going to announce it? That's what I want to know. So, okay, now we get to this rock wall. So I'm watching this show, and the guy's very nice. I think his name is Scott Walter. It's his show. It's America Unearthed. And they had the whole morning, like 8 episodes, 8 hours of it on the History Channel. They've pretty well shown all the ancient aliens, and I recorded all of them. I think there's 80 episodes. And then there was a new one tonight, and there was a new Hangar 19 MUFON. So if you have TV, if you have cable, make sure you watch the History Channel on Fridays if you want to learn some stuff that you never would have imagined. So here it is. In around 1852, 3 guys were in a field in Texas. Now, if you want to find the field, I guess you identify the Oklahoma-Missouri line, and you drive south. In line with that, you drive south about 50 miles and then east about 25 miles. And somewhere over there is this town. And these 3 guys were going to hand dig a water well. So they dig about 5 feet down, and they find some stones. And they go, So they dig up some more, and they realize they found a stone wall. Well, okay. So they keep digging, and they go down, like for their well, most water wells go down about 25 feet, but it's different. It depends on where your water level is, your aquifer, in different parts of the country. Anyway, there is this beautiful wall mortared. 1, 2, and 3-man stones. Now, I mean, a 1-man stone is something 1 man can lift by himself. A 2-man stone, it takes 2 men to lift it, and a 3-man stone takes 3 people to lift it. So they keep digging, and it seems to go on a straight line. Well, guess what? It goes on a straight line for 20 miles. 20 miles, lined up with the summer solstice. And finally, over the years, they finally dig down to the bottom of it. And Swami, guess how many feet tall this wall is?
33.
70 feet tall.
Wow.
All rounded, look like maybe even shaped stones with an inch of mortar between them. They've got maybe an inch to an inch and a half of mortar under the stones, and in adjacent stones, it's more like 3/4 of an inch to an inch. But there it is. And it goes on for 20 miles. Well, this is why I'd really like to have a talk with Scott Walter. Maybe I could contact him and have him as a guest on the show, because there's just some failure of logic this guy has. He seems otherwise good as a what does he call himself? A forensic geologist or an archaeologist.
Anthropologist?
No, he's a geologist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but somewhere, like, there's a screw missing. I mean, he's such a nice guy. And he seems to, like, get right close to the issue, and then he seems to somehow back away from it and drop it. And I'm sitting there flabbergasted thinking, what planet did this guy come from? Well, you know, did he ever take a logic class? Did he ever write a computer program? Does he know what logic is? So anyway, what's interesting is that in another part, he shows a map that it's a rectangular enclosure 20 miles by 7 miles. Well, just imagine, who in the hell created a 70-foot tall wall 20 miles by 7 miles enclosing 140 square miles of land? So in one excavation, because they dug along it, you go down about 5 feet. Now you got to understand what this topography looks like. It's flat as a pancake. There's not a rock in sight for 50 or 100 miles, not even one. And they named the town after it. It's called, you're going to love this, Rockwall, Texas.
Ah, yes, okay.
I would go there. I would drop in, but there's nothing to see because the people are scared that the federal government or the state of Texas is going to declare it to be an archaeological site and take away their rights to develop the land however they wish. So every time they dig down and expose the wall, they quickly cover it over again. So it's like, geez, is it a wall that's 20 miles long, or is it a rectangular enclosure? Seeing he showed a map with both things, which is it? Wouldn't that be a simple question to answer?
One would think.
Yeah. So then the other thing that I love, and this isn't his fault. I mean, he's not to blame for every little problem with the show. They never excavated both sides of the wall. I mean, why would you discover a wall and dig 70 feet down on one side and not dig down 70 feet on the other side to see what the hell's going on back there? Why?
Yeah.
I mean, so all these pictures from the 1920 excavation, the 1955 excavation, all these pictures of various excavations, they only exposed one side of the wall. And so that was strange. Then a guy in one of the excavations found a giant skull. They found a giant skeleton. And the skull, and you're going to love this, it was the size of the skull was a third of a bushel. Well, before you laugh too hard, back then in 1850, that was a common way of measuring things. People had 1 bushel basket, half bushel baskets, quarter bushel baskets, third bushel baskets. And so he probably wanted something to put the skull in, and he put it in a third of a bushel basket and goes, wow, it fits. I would estimate, not being an expert on this, nor do I have a lot of human skulls to try this out, but I do have a box that I know for a fact. It's a commercial fishing box it's polyethylene. It costs $10. All the fishermen in the world. I've seen pictures in National Geographic of fishermen putting their catch in the west coast of Africa in the same boxes that I can go buy in the fishery supply store. They're great. You can even buy a cover, and they stack. And if you turn them the other way, they nest. Great little thing. You can put a rope on it, drag it over the ground. It's thick polyethylene or styrene. I'm not sure. I think it's polyethylene, just very, very thick polyethylene. So anyway, very useful thing. And it holds 1.5 bushels. So I'm estimating that the average human has a skull that would fill a 1/4 bushel basket. And this skull filled a third of a bushel basket. So therefore, you would have to assume that the person was 50% taller than we are, and therefore was probably 8 to 10 feet tall. So that would explain a lot. Like, who would build a wall like this 70 feet tall? Well, if you're a giant, it might be, a much smaller matter than it would be for you and me. So along comes Scott Walter, and he takes out his knife and he goes, now steel is 5 on the Mohr scale, M-O-H-R. And if it's harder than that, then it's probably granite. And if it's softer than that, and I can scratch it with the knife, then it's probably limestone. So he scratches it easily, and he goes, it's probably limestone. But now we'll see for sure. And he pulls out a bottle of dilute hydrochloric acid. Don't you always walk around with a bottle of dilute hydrochloric acid?
I just set mine over here on the desk.
That's what I'm saying. So he pours it on the stone, and he goes, now, if it's limestone, it'll fizzle. Well, it fizzled, so therefore it's limestone. So then he said, well, where can I see the wall? And everyone says, well, nobody's got it exposed, but there's this really wealthy guy named Kevin, and they show his house. It's like 4-story, ultra-modern, standing tall above the prairie, beautiful. And he's got a brand new excavator. I mean, a big one, 1 cubic yard per swipe with the bucket, and a brand new front loader. And he says to Scott, come on over to my place, and I'll loan you the excavator, and you can dig down and see the wall. Well, hallelujah. So they go over there, and they dig down 25 to 30 feet, and there's the wall, mortared perfectly. Did they expose the top of it or the back of it? No. I'm like, come on, you got the excavator right there. Just show me how thick this thing is. From what little I can see from all these different pictures, I think it's like 2 feet thick, but it might be 3 feet. But anyway, every so often, guess what? There were some longer stones, and they turned them so they stuck out of the wall like a staircase. And you know how if you measure the distance from the edge of one step on your stairs to the edge of the next step up or above it or below it, it's probably, I don't know, it's usually 7-inch steps, so it's probably 10 inches. The distance between the stones was 30 inches. So just think about that. You're climbing a staircase of stones sticking out of a wall about 2 feet, 24 inches, and the space between the treads is 30 inches. But using them, you can climb up the wall from the bottom to the top. And it's angled at a 45 degree, and all along the wall, various people report there's these stepping things. So then there's some circular openings, like not in this excavation, but in one of the pictures that I saw. And obviously, if they were giants, they weren't using it, ingress and egress. They were using it as a window, I guess, But it's like 20 feet from the top, so you had to be 50 feet tall to look through it. I'm not sure what they were doing with it. Maybe to let the wind blow through. I really have no idea. But a 2-foot diameter circle with smaller stones cut like a keystone arch to keep it from collapsing. Now, from all that I've told you, would you guess A, that it's natural, or B, that it's man-made?
Man-made, for sure.
Well, okay, so Scott Walter shows up with another guy from Geology Institute, Magnetic Geology at the University of Texas in Dallas, with a really nifty steel chainsaw-powered core drill, about 16 inches long. And he drills a core into several of the rocks in a 5-foot wide pattern and 5-foot high pattern, and he marks the ends of the core really carefully to show which was pointing up and which was pointing, and then he numbers them so he knows which core, and then he does a drawing showing the wall and where he took the cores out. Then he brings it to the University of Dallas, or University of Texas in Dallas, and he puts it in a special really nifty machine, and he puts this core in there, and it measures the magnetic field, the direction when the stone was formed. And the theory is, which is, I'm sure it's a good theory, if the stones are all oriented magnetically in the same direction, then it must be natural. And if they're not oriented in the same direction, then it must be a man-made wall, because I've built plenty of stone walls, and I'll take a rock and I'll turn it until I see the best fit and the best balance, and then I'll place it. So if I had a bunch of stones that were magnetically charged in one direction from a quarry, but I turned them around and turned them over and whatever, the adjacent stones would have all different magnetic directions. So then the geologist says that he concludes that this is an 85-million-year-old wall. And it's natural, because at that part of Texas, there is hard-pan clay 300 feet deep. And at some point in geological history, it all would have dried out. Well, first of all, it would have somehow formed limestone, which is possible if it was the bottom of a shallow sea, because that's how limestone is formed. Little diatoms and other organic creatures die, and their skeletons fall to the bottom, and over millions of years, it makes a layer of limestone. In fact, that's what the Herkimer diamonds are, these football-shaped, double-ended quartz crystals that are natural in Herkimer, New York, which used to be the floor of an inland sea. And wherever there was a huge algae bloom that was covered over by these skeletons of these little sea creatures, later it became limestone, and then it rose back up to the surface, and the soil eroded off, and there's all this limestone. These pockets where the algae blooms are where the Herkimer diamonds are. And the limestone's really soft. You can cut into it really easily. And when you break into a hollow, there could be a Herkimer diamond from 1/4 of an inch long to a foot long, the size of a football. Beautiful, beautiful stones. And these people will lease you like 50 square feet of limestone in their fields for a day, and they'll even give you like a wheelbarrow and a shovel and a pick, and you can go out there. Many people bring much more sophisticated equipment, and then you just keep cracking the limestone until you find a pocket, and right in there will be another Herkimer diamond, or maybe several of them. So all that's very interesting. I don't know if you knew about Herkimer diamonds.
I have heard the term, but I didn't know what it meant or where they came
from. Well, they're really unique. If you get a chance to buy one, put it under your pillow. It helps you remember your dreams. And it also supposedly makes your dreams a lot more vivid. So anyway, So then you're thinking, a natural wall, 85 million years old. Now, I have a windrow in my south field. Now, at some point, some idiots who didn't know any better tried to have farm animals in New England. And somebody probably had cattle or sheep or goats. And as they fenced off the field and they ate the grass and they trod through, the stones rose to the surface. So they obviously took a wagon, maybe with a horse or a mule, and they put all the stones on the wagon and dumped them in a long row in the field. Well, the pile is 5 feet wide and 5 feet high, and it's about 100 yards long. And I know that because I took my backhoe and sank it into it to see how big it was. And I was amazed because this was only 100 years ago that, and the only thing we have blowing around in Maine is leaves because this is wet here. There's no dust. Like the idea that you could get enough dust to bury a 5-foot-high wall is ridiculous. So it had to be leaves. And it's when you drive in the field now, you only see maybe 1.5 feet at the most, maybe just 6 inches high of stones sticking out of the field, and maybe 1 foot to 2 feet wide. And they're all small little rocks the size of grapefruits, like that kind of stuff. So they were obviously trying to clean up the field so they could plow it, which is ridiculous when you only have 6 inches of dirt on top of granite. So anyway, how could this be a natural wall? Well, then Scott Walter explains with this geologist that the clay would have dried out over geological time, fractured, and then a sand dike was formed. Well, I hadn't heard of that before, and the sand dike is where water and sand comes from below and intrudes into the cracks and fills in the gaps between the stones, and then it too, because the stones are limestone, and limestone, when it rains an acid rain, it leaches lime into the sand, it would form mortar. Well, that's just such a great theory, except for some major flaws that he never addresses. What's wrong with you, Scott? Scott, where did you go wrong? Was it your mother's fault, your father's fault? Is it your fault? Is it your school's fault? Because if all the stone hardened and then fractured and there were intrusions, how come no matter what side of the wall they dig on, they get dirt 70 feet deep down to the bottom of the wall? Now, shouldn't that all be more fractured stone? Shouldn't the fact that you don't see a stone on the surface for like 50 miles be a clue that there's no other stone? This stone was brought there. And how can water intruding with sand from below lift each stone neatly an inch to 1.5 inches and make a nice mortar mix to seal it? Now, I will say that somebody gave me a whole bunch of granite cobbles that had been cemented together, mortared together, and I couldn't use some of them because I spent days trying to chip the mortar off the granite, and I realized that it just wasn't going to happen because it was so well glued to the stone, whereas all the stones that you see that have been removed individually don't have any mortar glued to them. So I wasn't there. He didn't even comment on the mortar. I mean, it's like, what? Here he's got this great mystery. He's got great close-up video. He's got scientific instruments, and he can't answer the simplest questions. So somebody dug up a 5-foot-long, 2-foot-high section of it, took a picture of it, and then took it apart and brought the rocks to the courthouse in Rockwall, Texas, and remortared it in front of the courthouse. So there's a little picture of the wall of Rockwall, Texas. So what do you think of that story? I mean, to me, that's absolutely fascinating because, you know, how many years would it take to fill in a 70-foot wall and cover it with 5 feet of dirt completely? If it's an enclosure 20 miles by 7 miles, how much dirt would it take to fill that up to 5 feet over the wall?
I don't know.
And where would you get it?
Right.
And when was it built? And if it was 85 million years ago, what's a skull the size of 1/3 of a bushel doing in there?
Right.
So to me, that was just totally fascinating. I mentioned it to Nancy, and she goes, "Well, that is interesting." And every so often, she puts in oddball things. If she asks the Zetas and they give an interesting answer, then she'll put that in there to jazz up her weekly newsletter that you can look up on zetatalk.com. There's a list of her weekly newsletters, and it has the subject and the date and they're all numbered and consecutively, and the most recent is at the top. And so, like, for instance, I was reading the UK Daily Mail, and a satellite picture took a picture of Nessie swimming in the Loch Ness. So I told her about it and sent her the picture, and she goes, "Oh, this is the kind of sexy news that I'm looking for, jazz up the newsletters, keep them from being all gloom and doom." And she asked the Zetas, and they said, "Yeah, that's Nessie, the Loch Ness monster, swimming in the lake, and the satellite got it." Who knows if that'll be the subject of a newsletter, and we'll ever find out if the Zetas say what that wall is. But to me, it sounds like something the Anunnaki would have done, and they were here a million years. They were here for 600,000 years before they decided to make us as slaves. So there could have been a time when they just found regular Earth humans that they created quite irritating, and maybe they just wanted to build a wall 70 feet high to have a protected area where they could do their giant things. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what other explanation can you think of?
None from this Swami's point of view.
Yeah, because
one of the things that after taking the pole shift and the return of Nibiru, Planet X, Nemesis, Herculobus, whatever term one likes to apply to this part of the solar system. When you understand that aspect, and then you watch like Ancient Aliens, it becomes curious why they're not on board with this.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see George Noria on Ancient Aliens all the time. I've been on his show 4 times. He knows very well that Planet X is here and it's about to cause pole shift. Do you think they ever allow that to be mentioned on there? I mean, who's running that? I guess it's just major media. You can talk about anything you want, and occasionally they'll do a reference like, and that might have involved the Anunnaki as theorized by Zecharia Sitchin. Well, okay, thanks. That explains it. No, it doesn't explain it, but there's so much of this out there, and just put the pieces together, We've been visited since the earliest times. People have been doing all kinds of projects everywhere. And in New Jersey, the rising seawater is covering over a marsh that just looks like a salt marsh. And believe me, there's a lot of salt marshes in New Jersey, and there's plenty of mosquitoes because of that. But aerial photos showed a 10-mile stretch of the Jersey Shore that's all salt marsh. There's giant language symbols dug into the surface of the salt marsh. And so the Zetas took that as a question years ago. And it's basically the Anunnaki, when they're flying around the Earth, they wanted to know where they were. So they would do different things like build the Great Pyramid, or various structures, or the Nazca lines, and in this place they had written out a whole description, and if you flew over it you could read what it said. And I don't know if it's directions to the next town because it's Anunnaki language, so who knows how to translate that. Zechariah translated Sumerian cuneiform, not Anunnaki written language.
Right.
So but yeah, there's this stuff going on all over the place. And that reminds me, because you had mentioned this, and I was going to mention it the last show. There's a couple things I meant to mention in the last show, but one of them was how you said when it really sank in, because you weren't familiar with what I've been saying and stuff like that, that, it was almost like you got a cold chill down your spine, you and your wife both realizing, hey, this is real. So, and you asked me if I felt the same way, and I said no, because I've been living it since I first found out the pole shift was coming in '68, and I determined I was going to be ready for it. So that's why I moved to Maine in '85. I had a vision of pole shift in '73, another one in '88. I've devoted my life to learning how to survive with nothing, and what to eat and what not to eat, and how to build a shelter and how to build a fire and all this stuff. So it's just like I'm almost worn out waiting for it, and it hasn't happened. So I'm really glad that there's some evidence that what I'm saying is true, because when I first started reading Zeta Talk, I thought, well, I know all of that. And it was talking about the little gray aliens being human, and there's unselfish and selfish. And I thought, well, I already know that. But then in 2006, Janet and I had been doing a lot of lecturing, and groups were always inviting us to come and speak. And I said, I wonder who's saying, and I hadn't done a radio show yet, but I was writing emails. I had about 20,000 people on my email list. And I said, I wonder who's saying what we're saying. And then I went back to Zeta Talk, and I was like, oh, my God, Nancy Lieder is saying exactly what we're saying, but in so much greater detail. It's mind-boggling. When you look at that, 40,000 pages of questions from the public and answers from unselfish human extraterrestrials. It's like, and I still say this, it's one of the greatest contributions to humanity. So you and I differ in that respect, but I'm sure that there are people just like you out there that are slowly realizing, oh my God, this isn't a hoax, this isn't a fairy tale, this isn't some stupid story that somehow arrived from wherever. And I think that's the thing, but who's waking up to this? You did. You and your wife realized this is true, and it's
what it did was it put an exclamation point on a whole bunch of intuitive things that I had picked up through meditation and just guidance sort of things, but it put a point to it, and went, now all the dots come together.
Yeah, it's like a big picture. These are all pieces of the puzzle, and by themselves, you can call them anything you want, and you can say that any part of it's not true, but excuse me, when you realize that it all comes together as one rational, logical evidence, picture, conclusion with proof. Like when I went out, it's right there in Zeta Talk. I'm not sure where it is, but I went out on July 4th, I think, 2011, to take a picture of the full moon, and it was a large moon, and I had my handheld Fuji digital camera, and I stood on a stone bench that I cut and made myself, and I'm standing there, and I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. And if you've ever taken a digital picture, you know that the camera takes a little bit to cycle. Mm-hmm. And the moment that I wanted to capture was when it just came over the horizon, and in the foreground were some goldenrod stems and some furniture that I put on top of the mountain. So you've got that, and then you have the full moon. Well, as soon as it cycled, I was being eaten alive. I took a second picture. Well, I put them in my in a directory, and I was clicking back and forth between them, and I realized, oh my God, I did not move in that minute or 2 minutes it took to take those two pictures, because the pictures line up. You could take a transparency of each and put them over, and the grass and even the border of the picture exactly the same. And I attribute that to my training as a marksman, as a sharpshooter, in the 3rd grade with the National Rifle Association gun range in the basement of my elementary school. So I've just gotten used to, and being a professional photographer, I can really hold a camera still, and I've never needed a tripod because I can just do that. And so here I had not even moved even a millimeter, and the only thing that was different was the moon was rising, right? Well, the moon wasn't rising. Between the two pictures, the moon went sideways, and what does that prove? It proves that the Earth wobbles. So as the moon was rising and the sun was setting, all of a sudden we were being pushed further north. And, in the morning, the main zooms towards the south. And then as the sun sets, the main zooms towards the North Pole. And so here is a picture taken a minute apart, and the moon hasn't risen at all. Instead, it moves sideways. And so Nancy made that into a GIF file where it's animated and you can play it and you can see it on Zeta Talk. And I took that picture myself, those two pictures. And it's remarkable. You can see that, because you're taught the moon rises in the east, and then it reaches its height at midday, and then it sets in the west, just like the sun, just like all the stars, just like all the planets. And here, instead of rising, it's going sideways. It's going to the right. And of course, that's because Maine is going to the left. And this proves the earth wobble. So it's things like that where I've gone out and said, well, if this is true, then I ought to be able to take a picture of it. And I have. You see, that's pretty convincing. You can try and talk me out of any part of this, but you're not going to succeed because I've proved it to myself. And I've got the evidence that anyone else can look at, too.
I'm enjoying checking out this webcam from Italy, yeah, where every evening, if there's not cloud cover, as the sun is going down, right there at about the 4 or 5 o'clock position below the sun, boom, big red, it's right there. It's not.
Yep. 2 suns.
I mean, it's pretty.
Yeah. So, like, who's hoaxing that, Oh, it just drives me nuts. So now, I'm friends with Nikki Thetzi, and I guess some people at Revolution Radio don't like Nikki Thetzi. I'm not going to get into the politics of what each side says or what goes on, but I'd like to have her on as a guest. But anyway, I'm very good friends with her. She is a very high-level psychic, but not the way you would normally think. Have you ever seen those charts in the Hindu religion where the average person is centered in the physical, emotional, and mental, but as you become more and more spiritual, you expand the 4 levels of spirituality and the focus, and it shows like a triangle for the average man, and then it shows like a diamond with only the point going down into the physical, emotional, and mental, and the rest of the consciousness and the existence of this person, the spiritual person, is all in the higher levels. Have you ever seen a drawing like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what Nikki Thetzi is like. She actually claims herself. Now, we've been talking that we're in the 3rd dimension and we're going to go to the 4th dimension. And people have theorized that, is Jesus a 5th dimensional being, or is he 6th or 7th? Nikki is on the karmic board, so she has the power to wave karma and change karma, move karma to other times and places where you might be able to deal with it better. She herself says she's a 13th dimensional being. So, that by itself isn't going to mean anything to you, except that I've known her for 2.5 years, and she's the real deal. And so she went to the Joshua Tree Conference in Joshua Tree, California, which is in the desert. I guess it's east of L.A., which is going to be underwater, because the only thing surviving in Southern California after pole shift is Big Bear Mountain in San. So she went there and she touched the ground, and she instantly realized that very soon it's going to be under hundreds and hundreds of feet of salt water. And so she thought, it's a UFO conference. There's going to be a lot of really spiritual people. And she realized as she looked around that most of the people who were there are narcissistic and selfish, service to self. And they had no interest and no development in spirituality and no interest in developing spirituality. And she put out a call to see who was in the light and wanted to help bring light and love down to anchor that on Earth to help ease some of the pain that we're coming up to very soon. Mm-hmm. And about 20 people answered the call. And she had a beautiful meditation session with these 20 people, and everyone else was not interested in the slightest. And there were a lot of people there. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Joshua Tree, not only is it now famous for having the conference where everybody suffocated in the dome, the sweat lodge. Remember that?
Right, yeah.
A couple of years ago. That was an ill-fated experience. People paid $10,000 a piece to go in this dome with with a fire and like 120-degree heat and no air. And the guy got convicted for, I forget what it was, involuntary manslaughter or who knows what. It was something minor, but still, I mean, if you're paying $10,000 to become an ascended master in one weekend, as if that's even possible.
Right.
Yeah, you have to laugh at the people that would do that. Uh, sure, I'd like to be an Ascended Master. I can spare about 2 minutes. You got him? So, but anyway, right near there is Giant Rock. Now, are you familiar with Giant Rock?
No.
Giant Rock is a famous UFO site. There was this guy, George Van Tassel, and he discovered that flying saucers were always landing near Giant Rock. And Giant Rock is like 8 stories high. It's just right out there in the desert with no explanation, hardly any other rocks around, is one giant rock. There's like 2 Marine Corps bases nearby, so it makes sense that maybe saucers would want to land there. But anyway, George Van Tassel went out there and realized this was a great place to hold UFO conferences and talk about his experiences with extraterrestrials. So he actually built a conference center and a house, and he lived out there, and people could go visit him. And he's dead now. But in the conference center, he built this machine, the Integratron, I think it's called. I may have that wrong, but I think it's called the Integratron. And he used to turn it on and use it to show people and whatever it was that he was showing them. Which, when I heard about it, I thought, well, that's not real. I mean, he says it's real, and he's trying to do something. I'm not sure what he's trying to do, but I'm pretty sure that it's not doing what he thinks it's doing. So anyway, he died. I think it's now part of a park, or maybe it's in a trust. I don't really know what the arrangement is. But there was a young caretaker in the 20s, and of course people at the UFO conference in Joshua Tree last weekend wanted to see the Integratron. It's this huge machine that he built. It's hard to say what it does. I think it's sort of a dimensional thing, but I don't really know. So he offered at the conference that if people were really interested, that he would open it up and everyone could tour inside the building. So Nikki thought, well, what the heck is this? So she went on the tour, and she realized as soon as she walked through the door, this was a huge machine. It doesn't need to be turned on. What it does is it programs people to be angry and to change their karma and to recruit them for the evil side. And just by walking in and being near this machine, people were being affected on a level that they, not being conscious on that level, how would they know?
Right.
And they were being programmed. And so Nikki, in her little mysterious way, completely deactivated the whole mechanism, and it will never work again.
Yeah, I'm looking on the Google Images at the Van Tassel's Integratron.
Yeah. So anyway, I had said, I think last week, that I had mentioned to Nikki about the picture of Planet X next to the sun, and she had seen the picture and gone to sleep. And that night, while she was asleep, she felt as if, or while she was meditating, I guess she wasn't asleep, because she meditates nearly 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And the work that she's doing on the level that she's doing it requires that, and it's not so much going around trying to make a living or whatever. So if you looked at her from a normal business point of view, you'd say, this girl's a mess. But if you ever talked to her and experienced any of her healings or any of the other things she does, and her knowledge, her information level, it's just amazing. She felt that Planet X had landed on her chest, and she felt the weight of it, and she immediately tuned in on the horror of the looting in L.A., and the fact that the president is going to declare martial law, at least in L.A., but probably all of California. So she called me today to say that last night she tuned in, and she could feel India just slipping right under the Himalayas, and everybody, 1.25 billion people, are going to be lost in the twinkling of an eye. So, this is real. I had a guy. He was a wealthy multimillionaire in Florida. He had some really interesting things to say about being your own person, which I liked. So I contacted him, and then I put him on my mailing list. And then I sent him the information because he was saying that he sees India as the land of the future, and he's investing in it. He lives in Palm Beach, Florida. And so I wrote to him and I said, it's not good that you're living in Palm Beach, and India is going under, and so is Florida. If you want to make a difference in the world, why don't you first of all move, and second of all, figure out a way to warn people what's going to happen. And he said, please take me off your mailing list and never write me again. So that's what people are like. Anyway, Nikki and I were talking, and we got into what I consider, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the moments before death. And this is really interesting. Nobody that I know of has ever brought this up on a radio show. But Nikki was saying that the thoughts and the emotions that you feel at the moment that you die control your future after death. Now, I told you at the beginning of the show that my nephew and his girlfriend bought a house in Kingston, New York, just a few feet above the Hudson River. And she had said, well, you only live once. And I was thinking, well, it's thinking like that. It's going to cause you to live another 1,000 lifetimes, because you don't realize that you're in a soap opera continuously over and over and over again until you finally realize that you're in a soap opera, and you wake up and you say, is there more to life than this? Is there something else? And that's when you turn to things like I've turned to and like you've turned to, when you say, wow, I want to go to that next level. I want to find out the rest. And you take yourself out of that third dimensional wheel of doing it over and over and over again. Of course, you could get stuck at any level, and you could even do some really bad things and go back a few levels. But ideally, if you're with it and you're awake and you're trying to grow, you will continually make steps to become a more and more spiritual person, and to reach with the ultimate goal of, with all the rest of humanity, merging back to become the creator again.
In the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, which is more commonly known as Hinduism, that's the whole thing. The one became the many, so the many could experience manyness, which couldn't be experienced from the one point of view, but with the focus of rejoining the one. So that's the whole play of consciousness, being born like an actor onto a stage in a huge improv until you figure out you're on a stage in a big improv.
You go, haven't I done this before? Do I really want to be doing it again? You know, is there anything else? Is there more to this? So we were discussing how. Now, this is really interesting. If you go through trauma at the moment of your death, your soul will fragment and put pieces all over the place. Now, this is what Nikki was talking to me tonight before the show. Your soul will go all over the place, and when you're reborn, first of all, you will be trapped to live another third-dimensional life. You cannot possibly move on to a higher dimensional frequency because you're not all there, first of all. And second of all, you had very negative and depressed or angry thoughts at the end. So the trauma of war actually recruits psychotic people, because when they're reborn, they're not whole. So I guess I'm going to have to get into that next week, right, Swami?
Yep.
Well, I hope everybody found this an interesting show, and we're going to continue with these deep thoughts. So have a good week, and I love you, Swami. Thank you very much once again.
Namaste and blessings to all.